Okay, good morning. Okay, so we're in the middle of this, series of sorts of Geirus Shilas, who's a Jew, who gets the right to paskin certain Shilas. So this is related to that, to those themes in a lot of ways. It's a unique grace of Machlekes, and I want to start like this. Everybody here knows that Rabbi Yashiv in the 90s, 2000s was more or less the undisputed Gadol Hadar of our world. Right? When he was Nifter in 2012, he had a tremendous Levaya. Rabbi Yashiv was the Gadol Hadar. Now, it's always fun to imagine the what-ifs, like if something would have been different. So I want to share a story about Rabbi Yashiv's Rebbetzin, and we'll use that to back into this discussion. There was a young man who came to Rabbi Yashiv in the early 2000s. He had just lost his Steller. He had been a Rav or a Shiva somewhere, and he was fired. He had lost his Steller. And he came into Rabbi Yashiv to talk to him, to complain that he lost his job, and he wanted he wanted some chizik. Rabbi Yashiv was more of a coldish person. Rabbi Yashiv wasn't able to help him much with what he was looking for. But Rabbi Yashiv's Rebbetzin heard him, complaining to her husband, and saw that Rabbi Yashiv wasn't able to help him, and she pulled him aside. And she says, I'll tell you something, I can help you. She says, my husband, the Pesach Hadar, Rabbi Yashiv, was sitting over here. He only became this Rabbi Yashiv that you know after he lost his job. So the young man says, what do you mean after he lost his job? She says, my husband had a good job. He was on his way to getting a government pension. We had Parnasa. He loved it. He loved what he was doing. He was it was so matim for his personality. And then he lost his job suddenly. And you know what he did? He came back home. He came back to Oil Sarah, to the little shul that was near our house. He went upstairs on the second floor where it was quiet, and he sat with mountains of Svarim for tens of thousands of hours, and just learned. And eventually what happened is he became Rabbi Yashiv, the Pesach Hadar that everybody knows, and he became the Gadol Hadar. So this young man was obviously very mechuzik with this, and he left the house feeling very good. So I want to talk about what that shell that Rabbi Yashiv lost was, how he lost it, what the fight is about. There was a tremendous machlekes mevucha, and I guess it's like a what if. What if Rabbi Yashiv would have stayed there? I don't know. Now, so for those who know Rabbi Yashiv's history, his backstory a little bit, Rabbi Yashiv in 1951 was appointed to be on the Bezdin Hagadol La'Irim, which is the Rabanuts. The way the Rabanut is structured in Eretz Yisrael is there's two chief rabbis who run the operations of the Rabanut for Sfardim and Ashkenazim. They have a committee that's comprised of the Vada Rabanut, people who run it, different Rabbanim. And then there's the Bezdin system within the Rabanut. And the Bezdin system starts with local courts in all different towns. And then in the 1940s, they thought of this idea, and they started in 1951, was to have a Bezdin Hagadol, like a Bezdin on top of all the Batei Dinim, a Bezdin La'Irim, which means that if someone had a psak that went through the Bezdin system, and he's unhappy with that psak, or he feels that psak was an error, was a mistake, he has a way to redress that. He could go to the Bezdin Hagadol, to the Bezdin La'Irim, and he could have this, looked at again. Now, the problem is that al pi Torah, there's really no such thing. You're not allowed, one Bezdin is not allowed to be mevatel the words of another Bezdin. If one Bezdin paskin something, a Bezdin on top of it is not allowed to come and be mevatel it. Al pi Torah, there's no such thing. Now, the Chazon Ish used to say about this Bezdin that it's arkais. The Chazon Ish used to call it arkais. It's just a court. It's not a Bezdin. Others, the Briskerov was very against this whole initiative of having a Bezdin Hagadol. It didn't allow people even to go into the building that the Bezdin was situated in. So this was a very, very controversial creation that was made. Now, Lamaisa, in 1951, Rabbi Yashiv was appointed to this Bezdin Hagadol, and he took the job. Now, how he resolved, the critiques from those who said he was going against the Briskerov or the Chazon Ish or whatever, is a story farzich, and there's lots of different stories and quotes and interactions that relate to that discussion. But Rabbi Yashiv took this job, and Rabbi Yashiv was, so to speak, built to be a dayan. This was perfect for him. Rabbi Yashiv would sit on the Dinei Torah. Generally, it was big cases. It wasn't so much Urim, it was big cases that needed a policy for the whole Rabanut. Meaning, if they had a Shaila, had to deal with a Gittin or a Geirus or a thing, so they would come to this Bezdin, and this Bezdin, who was made up of the biggest giants in the Rabanut system, would comprise a policy that they could bequeath to the whole Bezdin system, and they would follow it. Now, the joke goes that the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, that a person is not allowed to be done yichidi. One judge is not allowed done by himself. But the joke goes, all the years that Rabbi Yashiv was on this Bezdin, he was done yichidi. Because all the other Dayanim were so blown away by Rabbi Yashiv's greatness that whatever Rabbi Yashiv said, they went along with. So Rabbi Yashiv was done yichidi. But in any case, Rabbi Yashiv had this steller. It was a government job that paid relatively well. He was able to support his family. He had an office in Heichel Shleima, where this is based out of, with his own personal library. Downstairs on the main floor, there was a tremendous library. Rabbi Yashiv used to sit there for, days and days at a time, even when he didn't have cases to paskin. This was his research library. Rabbi Yashiv, had a very nice life. He was for 23 years till he was about 61. So do the reverse engineering, I don't know. It's whatever, that amount of years, Rabbi Yashiv had this stellar. Now, so what blew this up? So what blew this up is a shaila as follows. This is a wild question, a multi-layered question, and I apologize, it's going to take us a little bit of time to get through the hack. The halacha element of this is really more like a nitty-gritty in Hilchas Bezdin, which we'll get to in Mitzvah Hashem, but let's talk about the story first. So in 1923, a Jewish girl named Chava Ginsburg, in a little town in Poland called Lubeck, Poland, Chava Ginsburg found a non-Jewish man that she liked, and she decided to marry him. His name was a very Yiddish name, it's a very Polish name. His name was Bulik Burkowski. That was his name. Bulik Burkowski was her husband. She found this man that she wanted to marry. And Chava Ginsburg marries Bulik Burkowski. They settled down together. At a certain point, Chava Ginsburg's parents put enough pressure, the community put enough pressure, she felt bad enough that she decides that she and her husband decide together that Bulik is going to become a ger. And Bulik goes to the local town Bezdin. There is no conservative reform there. It's a little village somewhere in Poland. It's an Orthodox Bezdin, fully Orthodox Bezdin. And Bulik becomes Avram Burkowski. And he becomes a ger. Now, Avram and Chava Burkowski do not have a very happy marriage. And at a certain point, even before the war, they separate. And without a get, they separate. Chava clearly they're not very religious people. Chava just leaves one fine morning. And Chava and Avram / Bulik are free agents now, and somehow each one of them ends up in Eretz Yisrael. Bulik obviously considered himself to be a Jew. Avram Burkowski considered himself to be a Jew, and he ends up in Eretz Yisrael, separate from Chava. Two different individuals end up in Eretz Yisrael. Now, in like 20 years later, in 1940 something, Chava Burkowski decides to marry, what's his name? I forgot his first name. Otto Lang. A Jewish guy, I believe a Yaki. She marries Otto Lang, and Chava Burkowski, Nee Ginsburg, marries Otto Lang and has two children. They have two children, Chanoich. They have a son and a daughter. One is Chanoich, and the daughter's name is Miriam. Chanoich and Miriam Lang. Now the problem is, if you did the math over here, Chanoich and Miriam Lang are l'chayr mamzerim, are one fine specimen of a mamzer and one fine specimen of a mamzerus, because their mother Chava was married to Avram Burkowski, separated from him without a ger. Without a get, so she's an Eshes Ish. She goes and marries Otto Lang, has two children with him. These are children of an Eshes Ish that do not have a get. These are textbook mamzerim. These are simple case of mamzerim. So now, this was never asked to anybody. This was not a shaila. Life goes on. These are not religious people. They're living on a kibbutz somewhere. So life goes on. This shaila never arises. B'chal. Now, at a certain point, Avram Burkowski wants to get married again. He would like to get married again to another Jewish woman. He goes to a Bezdin, I think in Petach Tikva, which had some famous dayanim on it. Rav Shlomo Shimshon Karelitz was on it. Some other famous dayanim were on it. And he asks, could I get married to whoever he wanted to get married to? Now the Bezdin says, okay, sure, it seems like you should be able to. Let's just open your tick and let's see exactly who you are. And Bezdin clearly sees there's some odds and ends over here, some loose ends that weren't tied up properly. And Bezdin records in the register of the Bezdin system in Eretz Yisrael, Avram Burkowski, they make him give a get. Avram Burkowski gave a get to his wife, Chava Ginsburg, now Lang, in the year 1950, whatever. The children, Chanoich and Miriam, are mamzer and mamzeres, because they are from a marriage that wasn't dissolved properly. And Chanoich now is free to go, Bulik, Avram, is free to go marry anyone he likes, and Chava Ginsburg as well is free to go marry anybody she likes. Because now they're both free. Now they're taka free from each other. This is what the Bezdin records. Now again, this went quietly into the night because it wasn't relevant. Nobody cared. These were not people who cared about the Shaila B'chal. Now here, how does the Shaila rise to the fore? Now, Miriam and Chanoich Langer enter IDF service in the late 1960s. Both of them enter IDF service. They're regular Israeli citizens. And they decide to make a career of the IDF. They decide to stay in the IDF for a career. Now, they don't choose combat roles or becoming generals or whatever. They go to work in the Ministry of Defense. Under the defense minister, a famous pirate, Moshe Dayan. They both worked for Moshe Dayan. Now, Moshe Dayan was not religious. He was even slightly militantly anti-religious. Now, what happens is, Chanoich and Miriam both find potential spouses, people they'd like to marry. and they present now in Israel, you have to go to the Bezdin system in order to get married. They go to Bezdin to get married. Each one independently goes to Bezdin and says, I'd like to submit a document. I want to get married to so-and-so. Now, the Bezdin puts Chanoich and Miriam into the system, and it returns Mamzerus alert. So the Bezdin says, no, sorry, no bueno. This can't go. There's nothing I can do for you. I can't marry you off. You can't be married. Now, when Moshe Dayan hears this, their boss, he is we'll paint him nicely. He's very sympathetic, and B, he very, very much doesn't care about the halacha. So he starts a pressure campaign to get this changed. He says, Haytachon, this could be these two innocent people are not able to get married. Well, what's these two neshamas who work for me not able to get married? It's unacceptable. He starts a pressure campaign. And the pressure campaign reaches all the way to the Prime Minister, to Golda Meir, who's also completely not religious, with very, very little soft spot for religion. And they start a big pressure campaign that this is unacceptable. Now what happens is this case gets brought to the Bezdin Hagadol Eirim, to Rabbi Yashiv's Bezdin, in, let's say, the late 60s. The Bezdin Hagadol looks over the case, says that the Eidim that told us that Avram Bulik Berkovsky is a ger from Poland seem to be kosher Eidim. It seems to be a good, and we know it's pretty easy for someone to say that he's Muchsek Yisrael. We have no reason to assume that Avram Berkovsky is not a Yid, therefore this marriage is not dissolved. These children are Mamzerim, there's nothing we can do about it. This case gets bounced around no less than 6 times in the Bezdin system in Eretz Yisrael. Gets bounced around trying to find some sort of petach tikva, some sort of way to resolve this question. The case gets bounced around, but ultimately the Bezdin Hagadol Eirim, which is first starts off with Rabbi Yashiv, I forgot a dayan by the name of Abudi, and I forgot what the third one is. Eventually ends up being a Bezdin that's comprised of Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Yosef, and I think Rabbi Tzal Zolti, which is quite a heavy-hitting Bezdin. This is a pretty heavy-hitting Bezdin. They take a final look at it, and they say, this is not going to work. Avram Berkovsky is a ger. His marriage to Leah Ginsburg sticks. There was no get. Her marriage to Otto Lang is not acceptable. Children, Chanoich and Miriam, are Mamzerim. That's it. This is what the Bezdin paskins. Okay, now put that aside to the side. Now, the pressure campaign and the television campaign and the ads and Moshe Dayan threats and Golda Meir's threats, this is going on in the background. Now, steps into the breach another famous Rav by the name of Rav Shlomo Goren. Now, this is the Shaila that Mamish, I guess, catapulted him to tremendous national fame in Eretz Yisrael, and also put him in the blacklists of Charedim and Rabbinic Yiddishkeit, I guess forever, until we forget about it. Now, so what did he do? So now what happens is as follows, and this is interesting. I was looking at this. This is interesting to me. Rabbi Goren's appointment to being the chief rabbi and his involvement in this case, in my estimation, diminished the credibility and the kavod of the Rabanut in Eretz Yisrael in an incredible manner, something that they probably till today have not recovered from. Meaning, if you look at the chief rabbis before Rabbi Goren and the chief rabbis after Rabbi Goren, you'll see a marked difference in quality in how they're considered by the rest of the Eidah, how people look at them. Now, what I found interesting is that Lamashal, Rav Simcha Elberg, who wrote an article about this in Hapardis, which I'm going to quote from soon, he writes this, that Rav Goren is Pashut Biyadai, tearing down the institution of the Rabbanut, he's destroying it forever. He writes this. I found some from his camp, Rabbi Eliezer Malamed in his Sefer on Geirus, who's from Har Bracha and a big fan of Rabbi Goren, writes that after this fight with Rabbi Goren, the Rabbanut never recovered for decades after that. So it doesn't seem to be a point of contention. Everybody seems to agree with the basic fact pattern that this was to the major detriment of the Rabbanut. Now, what happened over here? So Rabbi Goren, now, depends who you believe, but our Gedolim, Reb Moshe said this, and Reb Moshe said it, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said it, Rabbi Yashiv said it, Rabbi Tzal Zolti said it. Everybody seemed to have felt that Rabbi Goren had a meeting or had an information passed between him and the president of Israel, Golda Meir, where he set up a basic quid pro quo. He says, if you'll make sure that I become the chief rabbi, if you make sure that you're Mesaviv, that I become the chief rabbi in the next election, I'll be Mesaviv that Miriam and Chanoich Lang will be able to find the heter. We'll be able to work out a way that they can become Eis Mamzerim. Now, it was a very, very contentious battle for chief rabbinate. Both chief rabbis, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi, wanted to stay on. New chief rabbis are running to replace them, and ultimately in 1972, Reb Shlomo Goren is elected as the chief rabbi of the Ashkenazim, and a certain well-known Rav by the name of Rabbi Yosef is chosen to be the chief rabbi for the Sephardim in the same election in 1972. Instantly, they're at odds with each other. They had known each other already before, and they're at odds with each other. And this psak becomes like the calling card of Reb Goren's tenure, his contribution to the Rabanut. So what does he do? He gathers together I apologize, it's taking a long time to tell the story. He gathers together nine Dayanim. Of them, some of them are former Rashi Bezdin, former Ab Bezdins. He gathers them together, and he has a special Moshe Bezdin where he overrules all previous Batei Dinim that had spoken on this matter because of a whole plethora of reasons that we'll go into in a minute. And he says that Bulik, Avram, he turns Avram back into Bulik, says his Geirus was never a real Geirus, Kumtais his marriage was never a real marriage, Kumtais the get was never needed, Kumtais they're not Mamzerus, and everything is good. Chanech and Miriam are just regular Jews who were born out of a marriage, and they're allowed to marry whoever they want. And to top it all off, to make sure this is not pie in the sky, the chief rabbi of the IDF at that time who replaced Rabbi Goren, his name was, I'm not going to remember the second, arranged Boi Bayom, a chuppah ceremony for Chanech and for Miriam with their respective spouses. And Boi Bayom, that the psak was issued, Chanech and Miriam were married, Shalom Yisrael. That's what was done. Now this created an uproar. Mamash an uproar. A, there were so many procedural things in Hilchos Bezdin that were done wrong over here. A, you can't really look over Batei Dinim before you. You can't overrule Batei Dinim before you. B, he said no names. Rabbi Goren just put out that he paskin with 9 other dayanim. It doesn't say who they are, nothing. It's anonymous. It's mamash like an anonymous psak. That's B. C is, and we'll see there's more things, the collect, who he accepted for Edison, who he was ma'ir on, etc., etc. Now, Rabbi Goren said that this is a pressure campaign, and I'm not going to tell you who made this psak. I'm not going to share this with you. Under Rabbi Yashiv's advice, an askin by the name of, I think, Tzvi Weinman, sued Goren in the Bagatz, in the Israeli Supreme Court, to force him to produce his psak. And eventually, Rabbi Goren had to produce his psak, which I have here today. It's hundreds of pages long of his psak. I printed it out years ago. You could buy it for a few $100s. You know, it's a safer, like the psak, ach v'achot, you could buy for a few $100s. I have it here. This was cheaper. But he was forced to share it. And he was also forced to pay 1,700 lira in legal fees to the Bagatz, and that really stung. Those who knew him said that was really what stung. The 1,700 liras that he had to pay was really farta peilisha. You know what I'm saying? It was farta peilisha, and that was very hard. That was very hard to pay that 1,700 lira. Now, so the psak was published, and all the gedolim, and I mean all the gedolim, everybody you could think of in that dar, Rav Chatzkel Abramsky, Rav Shach, Rav Yashiv, Rav Shlomo Zalman, the Stipler, Rav Moshe Chavroni, Rav Michal Feinstein, literally anybody you could think of, and then some that you can't, signed on to these psakim, to these kolkeris, to these charamas that said that all his psakim are not iskal, and you can't pay attention to them, you have to ignore him. He says it's not okay, it's not acceptable, and this became like a major schism, a tremendous breaking point between the Rabanut and the Gedolei HaPoskim in Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's interesting is in 1972, right before the psak was issued, Rabbi Yashiv, who knew Rabbi Goren from their previous interactions, and who was sitting Al Meidan, who was the dayan, who was the leading light, so to speak, of the whole Rabanut Bezdin system, resigned in protest of Rav Goren's appointment as chief rabbi. Rabbi Yashiv resigned. This is the resignation that his Rebbetzin was talking about, this losing his job. He resigned 23 years into his tenure as the Rav there. And to show what I'm talking about, the meeting of the Mayatzis that was held to issue the Kolkera and to have Machayis against this psak was the first meeting of any consequence at all that Rabbi Yashiv was ever invited to. Rabbi Yashiv was invited there as an expert witness, so to speak, meaning knowing Rav Goren, knowing the psak. Him and Rav Shlomo Zalman, this was the first time they were invited. They were invited to a meeting from the Mayatzis, Chachmeter, whatever it was called. And I guess you could say he never looked back. Meaning after that, Rabbi Yashiv slowly got intermingled into all the Nyanei Kahal. By the time the 90s rolled around, Rabbi Yashiv was the undisputed Gadol Hadar. So this is the resignation. Now this is the psaks. And I want to go into the psak a little bit from its technical aspects. The one who wrote on it best. Now, it's interesting is that there's two different Gedolei Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael who prepared Kontresim on this topic that were never published. One of them is Rav Shlomo Shimshon Karelitz, who was the original dayan who passed in the Shaila. Now, he wrote, and he said as follows. He said, I have a Kontris prepared. This is what he told people. But I was warned that should I publish this Kontris, I would probably get a bullet in the head. This is what he said. Rav Shlomo Shimshon Karelitz said. So, Mela, I withhold from publishing this Kontris because ad kadei kach, I'm not mechayiv. That's what he said. Now, the one who did kind of publish a kontris on it is Rabbi Tzalel Zalti, who's one of the dayanim from the Bezdin that originally sat with Rabbi Yashiv, who passed what he passed. And I want to read for you some of Rabbi Tzalel Zalti's critique, just to give you a flavor for what's going on over here. Now, interestingly, if you look at the kontris that we go and put out, the Gvias Edison, I don't have time to go into everything, but the Gvias Edison that he had with different people is fascinating. Like, they interviewed Avram Borkovsky, and they asked him, to check if he was really Jewish, check how much he knows. Do you know what Yom Kippur is? Yeah, I know what Yom Kippur is. Do you know how many days Hanukkah is? Either 6 or 7. Do you know, like some very basic questions they asked him, like, he was taka mufka, meaning he was not very Jewish by any sense of the word. But again, if he had a Kabbalah mitzvahs and he made a real Geirus, it shouldn't really matter, and we'll see this. Now, I want to read you some of the procedural difficulties that Rav Zalti is pointing out here. He says, for example, the first thing that Rav Goren, he's just picking at random, is he says, Rav Goren said as follows. Rav Goren said, the reason why I have to put together a bezdin to overrule you and to make my psak is because not only am I the only one who can do it, you guys cannot even do it. You, meaning Rabbi Yashiv, Rabbi Vadi, Rabbi Tzal Zolti, Rabbi Eliezer Goldschmidt, Rabbi Shlomo Shmit Karelitz, whoever's involved in this psak, you're going to tell me, fine, you want to review it? So join our bezdin. We'll make a new Moshe bezdin together. Rav Goren, you're welcome to come on the bezdin with us, and we'll make a psak together. He says, no, you can't do it because you're a negei b'davar, he said. You, Rabbi Yashiv, you, Rabbi Tzal Zolti, you, Rav Ad Yosef, you're negei b'davar because you're already paskin. Asid Adam Lamed b'diburi. Everyone wants themselves to be right. So you're not even able to revisit this psak anymore. It's over. It's out of your hands. You're a negei b'davar. And he brought a raya that there's a tshuva from the Marashdam who quotes b'shem Maralbach that says that once a dayan makes a psak and paskins it, that dayan can no longer be included on the bezdin anymore because he's going to just stick with his words. He's not going to change his mind. Now, what he's referring to was a big fight about smicha, which we'll get into. I think it's connected to our series now. We're going to have to get into it at some point. But the Maralbach told him, Reuben Lev, even if we wanted to have a joint bezdin now to handle this, we can't because you already made up your mind. And once you made up your mind, you're negei b'davar. You can't even go through it again. So says Rav Goren, I'm the only one who could even handle this. There's no one else who could even handle the shaila. To which Rabbi Tzal Zolti writes as follows. He says, I want to read you. He says, Ulam bala machberes. He never refers to them by name. He says, the writer of this kuntras, Takan b'dvar Mishnah. He made a mistake, missing a Mishnah. Shari Mishnah Mefureshes Hiba Sanhedrin. It's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin Lamed Aleph and Aleph. It says as follows: Kolzman shemevi raya soiser sadin. The Mishnah says any time that the baldin could bring a raya, he soiser sadin. Says Rashi. Rashi says habala bezdin. Someone came to Bezdin and he didn't have all the documentation prepared. He wasn't really prepared for this case, and he was yatsa chayev. Bezdin ends up passing against him, and he goes out chayev. He finds his shtar schusay and he brings it. Soiser sadin. Says Rashi, Taich soiser sadin. Base dinoi, his bezdin, meaning the bezdin that he was interacting with, soiser and leidina shepasku. They're soiser the din that they already paskin. The mechayven is connected, and they switch the din around the mechayv the connected. Says Rabbi Tzal Zolti, it's a mefurish Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if someone comes to a bezdin with more documentary evidence, with something that changed, something is new on the scene, and he brings it to the bezdin that paskin it is soiser their own din to go change their mind with him. So he says, and if you look in this kuntras from Rav Goren, you'll see that on pages, and he brings all the pages, it's 15 pages be'arech, where he brings that there's a tremendous amount of new documentary evidence that was produced, new edisim that he found, new people that he interacted with, new people that he discussed the shaila with. So if there's new evidence, bring it to the bezdin. That's a perfect case. It's a Mishnah, he says. It's impossible to say that you have a Marshdam that says that this bezdin can't paskin it anymore. It's a Mishnah Mefureshes that if there's new evidence, you go back to the bezdin, you paskin it again. That's tiny number one, he says. Then he says that not only did this person make it was tayyib our Mishnah, he doesn't even have an elementary. He says ein lo yediyah elementaryus behilchas mishpat. He doesn't even have a basic elementary level understanding of how mishpat works. And it goes back to this bezdin. Of course, he says he brings a Birkei Yosef and a Ritvalik. That's first. Then he brings another thing. He says Rav Goren in there writes a fascinating idea. He says there's another din in Hilchas Dayanis that says you're not allowed to dan a person shalei b'fanav. Meaning if the baldin, something you're danning a baldin, it has to be b'fanav. Says Rav Goren, an interesting thing. He says like this. He says, Nera l'chadish v'loimer, he says, the whole bayah of Kabbalah say the shalei b'fnei baldin, ene keyemes b'nidin didan. It's not relevant over here. Why? Shem shekol ha'edish shalanu shen eskablish shalei b'fnei baldin. All of this edis that was accepted, not in front of the baldin, meaning not in front of Avram Borkovsky, not in front of him, he says, is not really relevant to him. He says, why? Because manavshach. If he's a guy, so he's a guy. Who cares? The whole din of being makabel shalei b'fanav doesn't exist. And if he's a yid, so he's still a yid. Nothing that I could say could change him from being a yid. If he's really Klape Shema Yigali a yid, there's nothing I could say that changes him from being a yid. So what's the difference? It's irrelevant to Avram Borkovsky. This is what Goren says. Now it's a tremendous chiddush. Says Rabbi Tzal Zolti. He says, Elohim divrei b'al machveres. V'kashem oid lahamin shafilu misha rak pam lomad Torah. Even someone who once upon a time learned any learning, Yachol ha'itzim mitachas yadei divrei hevel ke'elu, could say something so stupid. This is what he said. I'm just reading you his words. He says, you're coming to be machvers on someone that he's not a yid. Could the stakes be any higher? Meaning, you want to be machzor on a guy that he owes a guy $100, that you can't do shalei b'fanav, right? The dan that he clipped somebody's mirror and he owes him $200, das nish. That the Allah psuk and shulchan aruch is you can't do it shalei b'fanav. But the dan that he's not a yid, Das yeah? He says that's a nothing psak, that's not relevant to him. He says, and he brings, of course, many sources. He brings Yerushalmi and Shutim Kveger, etc. That daning about a guy's yadus is the ultimate, the high stakes dan. There's nothing that's higher stakes than that. How can you tell me that you don't need to be b'fan of? Then he says about the idea of publishing an anonymous Bezdin that doesn't say who wrote it, who's the dayanim. So he says, Rav Goren writes that it's a, I want to get you these words right. Rav Goren writes that it's a minig, hang on one second. He says, Rav Goren writes, Hu nohog mekobel u'mekodesh me'azim itamid bebatei dinim beYisrael. He says, Rav Goren writes that it's a nog, it's an old and heilig minig that you don't publish the name of the dayanim upaskin on psakim, and that's why, aside from Rambam that he brings a raya from Rambam in Sanhedrin in Parak Beis Halacha Ches, which is not very strange the way he's reading the Rambam. He brings a raya from Rambam, and then he says this is a nog mekobel. So it says Rebbe Tzal Zalti. Besides the fact that it's not a Rambam, once again, even an elementary level of how Bezdin's run, he's not aware of. And he brings first various different Rambams that say clearly that Bezdin has two ways of letting the din be known. Either orally, Bezdin lets the din be known, the reish, the whoever it is, the mamuna, the oral, the safra the daini orally lets the psak be known, or Bezdin writes a psak, and they write, we sat with so and so and so and so, we made such a din. But Bezdin doesn't have to write what the Rambam means is they don't have to write who was the Mechayvim, who was the Isrim, meaning they don't have to write who was on which side. They could just say, from our Bezdin, such and such a psak came. Now here he says another interesting thing. He brings that there's a famous machlekes. Now this is too much to go into now, but there's a famous machlekes between the Beis Yosef and the Mabit. The Beis Yosef and the Mabit is a good share for itself, all the different machlekes that they had. But the Beis Yosef and the Mabit had a similar shaila as follows. You had a Moshe Bezdin of 3 people. 2 dayanim said a psak. Isser, Mutter, whatever the shaila was about. The third dayan, the dissenting dayan, he says, I so don't like this psak, I'm so against this psak, do me a favor, don't even sign my name in it. Just write that you guys passed on this, leave me off it. Now, there's a big machlekes to Mabit and the Beis Yosef about this shaila. Beis Yosef says, no problem, this dayan could leave, the third dayan could leave his name off, it's okay. The 2 dayan are paskin and that's enough. The Mabit says, not okay, you have to write your name in it. Now, to resolve their shaila, they went to discuss it with the Radvaz, who was older than both of them, who lived in Sas at the same time, and the Radvaz writes a tshuva about the same matter. Now the Radvaz is machriyat himself, like I don't remember, but I think like the Mabit, that you need to write the Dayan's name, but once again, you don't have to write who said what. You could just write, the Dayanim, mi beineim, such a psak came out. Now, it's a nidin for itself, and there's rayas lakan, but says Rebbe Tzal Zalti, ein zach is klar, that it's not a nog atik umukudish b'klal Yisrael, that you didn't write the names of the Dayanim. Because if it was, there'd be no such machlekes, Mabit, Beis Yosef, Radvaz. It says these 3 men, you got it, represent a tremendous amount of yediyah, of dayanis, and of psak, and not one of them seems to know this no gatik umukodesh, that you don't have to put the name on the psak, that it could just be an anonymous psak. Because in such a case, there's an easy solution. Just do the whole psak, anonymous. Done. Here's the psak, an anonymous psak. Finished. Says Elamai, he can't say that. He continues on. I'm running out of time. The clock is the king. But he continues on into Chuvas Reb Kveger and Chazanish and etc. Now, ultimately, he publishes this in the Paradise. He is sanctioned and loses part of his salary. Reb Tzal Zalti loses part of his salary. Reb Shlomo Lawrence ends up in Cherem. The war wages on, and the sides are drawn, and nobody really backs down. But the psak is the psak. And the Paiskim, our Paiskim, all put out many Kolkeris that I brought here. I just didn't have time to read from them, that clearly all say this. And I guess the reason why I was interested in talking about this is it's another example, first of all, of Geirus, of who's a Yid, who's a Jew, that Shaila. And again, the same type of position where you see the Gedolei Yisrael taking this very, very hardline role, that it doesn't matter how much of a Talmud Chacham or how Negeya, the learning is, or the psak is. This is a psak that is so consequential and so for everybody, that it could only be done by the highest echelons of din, by the Gedolei Hadar, by the Gedolei Yisrael. They're the only ones who could dan this shaila. And Memela, there's a tremendous amount of pushback to such a psak being given. Now, next week we'll either continue with another Geirus shaila. There's another famous shaila in Eretz Yisrael, the Geirus of Helen Zeidman, which is another big fight that maybe is worth getting into. Or maybe we'll talk about the Geirin from the Russian, Ukrainian, after the fall of the Soviet Union, all those people who came up to Eretz Yisrael. Or maybe we'll talk about some more Hilchos Bezdin, Sanhedrin, TBD. It's all related. It's all connected.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.